All right. Welcome, welcome. We're getting pretty far here. I think this is episode number 4 at this point for Transform Tuesdays. And as always, bring on the games, right? With some sports. So today I have here with me Robert Freyr from Data Meeting. Robert, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert Freyr, and I'm originally from Southern California. So my favorite sports teams are going to be the LA based teams for the most part, the Dodgers, the Lakers, and the Rams. So they've got a good roll going right now with a lot of championships, and been with Data Meeting for several years, and really do enjoy data and sports together.
Awesome. And as you always say, you root for the winners, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
For the winners. No, one thing I remember is this is a true story too. Is back maybe date myself a little bit, but back in 1986, in college, me and my classmates, we actually created a fantasy baseball league that we ran back in '86. And back then, of
Nice.
course, there wasn't any internet. So what I would do is on Sundays I would get the sporting news, which would publish every single baseball box score. And you would go through it, and every day you would write down somebody was 1 for 4, somebody got a hit, somebody got a home run, and then you'd manually tabulate that all up. So we had once a week scores that we came out with the fantasy baseball. So my
Nice.
my love for fantasy sports goes all the way back to, like I said, '86.
Nice. Nice. That's pretty sweet. I even remember doing that with, this makes me sound really nerdy, but some of the stock stuff in like middle school and high school. I'd save all the newspapers, and that WSJ subscription was always my favorite because it had more comprehensive view than some of the local newspapers did. So
That's right.
yeah, it's exciting to see like the data's a little more accessible than it used to be, right?
Oh yeah, when they first got sports on the internet, it was like it was a brand new world. All of a sudden, instead of having private information that you dug out of some newspaper somewhere, everybody has access to the to the data now. It's
Yeah,
pretty
that's
interesting that way.
so. Do you feel like it's gotten to the point where, especially when we talk about data transformation, is it kind of data overload? Do you feel people are going into over analysis?
Yeah, I think that with the advent of premium fantasy sites where you can pay a fee and you can get not just stats, but you get projections, expert analysis, right? So you get all of that done for you. So it's for somebody like me, it's almost sad because they do all that work for you, and you really got to work hard to find an edge somewhere because that data is going to be available to pretty much everyone in your leagues.
Nice. And when we kind of talk about that, right, do you foresee like basically you brought up the Dodgers a little bit. So do you see like having some of the baseball sensors or sorry, the bat sensors and even some of the
Mm.
ball sensors? Do you see some of that coming up in the future where like literally it tells you what's the torque of the ball as it's going through the air or
Yeah, yeah. I think they already are doing a lot of that kind of thing in baseball. With the Statcast um, features that they have, they'll tell you that the rotation is whatever amount and how much it dropped, and then if somebody hits the ball, they'll tell you what's the launch angle and what's the speed that the ball came off the bat. So that kind of
nice.
stuff is, it used to be where people would say, uh, you know, his when that guy hits a ball, it makes a different sound. That's the way that I grew up hearing announcers and commentators talk about it. Now they say it left his bat at a 35-degree angle at 110 miles an hour, and so they know exactly what it is that made the somebody like Mookie Betts hits better than some scrub or some pitcher hitting the ball. So
Yes.
it's really baseball and other sports too, but baseball especially I think are just made for stats. You just there's a line in For the Love of the Game, which is a movie for with Kevin
Mhm.
Costner, who's a baseball pitcher, and he says, we count everything in baseball, and that's I think that's really true.
Yeah, I would blame that uh, specifically, Robert, on how long the game takes. I
Yes,
always
it
like
does.
I like the idea of going to a baseball game. I love the food and all the stats and stuff, but normally by like the fifth inning, I'm like, oh man, it's going on. I've had too much beer, right? A couple too many um, hot dogs, right? I'm like, oh man, we gotta get this moving. Let's get some outs here, right? Get that perfect angle going. So, yeah, so you have some pretty cool workflows as we're kind of talking about this, right? That you would love to share. Let's go ahead and get these cracked open.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is just this is the off season right now, getting ready before spring training starts, and I'm an optimist. So even though right now the baseball players are locked out, I think that there will be a season. So I have some analysis that I want to do, and of course, these days you get data from websites pretty much anywhere, but sometimes I'd like to add a little bit of extra analysis. So just to let you guys see is here, this regular MLB.com, and I've gone to their stats page. And here, what I'm looking at is National League rookies because I want to take a look at those and see which ones I may want to draft onto my fantasy team.
Mm,
Now, I can read it right from here, but one of the things that I like to do is do some web scraping. Now, if I take the URL here and I copy it and bring that over into I'll put this in the chat. Um, I don't know, Andrew, if
oh,
there's a
yeah, I've
different way
got
of
it.
getting it out to everybody else, but that's
Yeah.
the URL for the chat. Oh, I mean, sorry, for this data. And one of the things that's nice is Excel has the ability to very easily get this data into a spreadsheet. So I'll just show you guys real quick because this is uh this is a time saver when you're trying to you know get
Mm,
some data in quick and easy. No, don't have to fuss about anything. So here in Excel, I've got a new workbook. I'm just going to go to data and from web, and up will pop a little dialog box here, and it lets you put the URL directly in.
nice.
And all right, good. And let me paste that and hit OK. And then it goes ahead and scrapes that page, and it will provide you some sets of data to pull from here.
And that's something that's very interesting, Robert. I think a lot of times, especially when we talk about transformation processes, right? We get really excited about this idea, ooh, I'm going to do some web scraping, right? And sometimes I think that's a good thing. So like let's say you're middle of the season and trying to gather the current season stats, right? That might be really important. But especially when you're accessing historical stats, right? You're not really going to have to pull those very often. So if you only have to really pull that once a season, sometimes it may not be worth investing in the process. And that's something that I like about what you're showing us here today is let's just make it easy. Like you don't have to do a whole REST API call or some fancy web scraping to avoid any uh, IP address blocks, etc., to get this data out.
No, that's a big point there, Andrew, because when you're doing this, you could just I want to spend time actually analyzing the data, not trying to figure out if I can use HTML or how I'm going to pull back and clean up the data I get. So here you just select the table and hit load, and it will load that data onto a workbook, and and you're off and running here. So what I've done in this case is once we see it, pull that data back out, and it's just a regular, ordinary uh, worksheet here. So taking a moment there. Of course, when I try to talk, I'm trying to time it, but it's not timing with me very well here. So as we're doing that, what I wanted to show you too is that uh, what I've done. Oh, there we go. There's our data. And since this is regular data, you can take it and you can create any other calculations you want. You can if in what I've done in another piece earlier is I grabbed some data and that same table that we're looking at now, and I added some stats that are projected out for a 162 game season because rookies will sometimes only play half the season or so, and this way you get that extra data in there. All right,
Mm.
now from that, what I've done is I've taken this data and I've moved it in and I pulled it into Alteryx in my case. So I've got my data, and one of the things you notice when you start to pull out some of this data is that some of it can get extra artifacts in your data. So what I've done is I've done a little of a workflow here to clean up the names, and so you'll see here, I've got my names now set up without all that other junk. And you'll notice right down here, the from that table, it has a double column header. So then I'm using the
Nice.
dynamic a rename to clean up those headers. I've got this caret up caret down arrow thing here, so I can also take that and simply use the select to change the name because that's my RBI column. All right, so that's one of the things that I've done here. Now, I happen to also be a subscriber to the Fantasy Pros, which is one of those
Mhm.
websites where you can pay and you can get extra analysis. And so, what I wanted to do is I went through that same process with Excel. I'm not going to do that process here, but I did that to is because they have their projection set up for 2022. So what I did is I pulled this entire data set and here pulled in from Fantasy Pros, and then I joined it with my 25 rookies, and I pulled in their projections as well, so I could see not just what they did last year, but also what Fantasy Pros projects them to do in the future. Now, I used this just to point out this is I used the find and replace instead of a join here because the names are not exactly laid out the same
Mm.
in both places. So I've got it here where if one name is contained in a larger context in the other, it will still find them. So I pulled all that data back and was able to uh, get not just again the historical data, but I
Mm.
also have additional columns here for the Fantasy Pros projection of how they think that player will do in the
Yeah.
upcoming year. So it's that kind of thing that I usually will do for different groups of players and stuff like that here in the preseason.
Yeah, so do you feel like whenever you're doing those transformations, right? Is there anything, especially on the joins, right? Like a fuzzy match type setup, um, that you feel isn't clear in terms of the data itself or in terms of the transformation that you have to go through every year to kind of make sure continues to get refined?
Yeah, this is one of those things. I think it's always going to be some ad hoc to it when you go to different websites because, like
Mm.
in here, for instance, one of the players was listed as having their full name and then a junior at the end, and in the other data set they didn't have junior. So again, when I tried to
Oh,
use the join, it didn't match because there was no junior on the one. But if I use the one that had the smaller name and I use this find and replace, what it does is it finds the existing name from that other data set and it's able to to match it up properly. And then all you have to do is tell it which columns you want to bring over. So
Okay.
here you can see that I've used the append to give me the runs, home runs, and RBIs, which for my league is what we care about in our for our scoring system.
Okay.
And then you can do any kind of calculations you wanted for scoring and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you feel like for each league you would almost need to do a separate app like you're doing here with player comparisons or other things?
Yeah, I think what I will normally do is I'll pull in the entire league in one data pool, right?
Mm.
So that I have all the hitters, all the pitchers, and then once I've got that, I can branch off into different analysis for different leagues, right? I'm very much into this stuff. So I have sub leagues where we have keepers, right? So we have players that stay on our team from one year to the next, and we get
Mm.
contracts. So we'll have that player for 3 years. Well, if I have a player for worth, on my team for 3 years, he's going to be worth more than somebody who maybe gets a little bit better stats to this year, but is going to be off my team at the end of this year, right? So you want to,
Yeah.
so I'll usually do different analysis based on the particular league, contracts, and other things like that.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think when we kind of look at this, right, there's lots of different angles to explore. And I think this is where, even when you think of things like Moneyball, right, obviously with sports and transformation of data, we've got to bring up Moneyball in some
Hmm.
capacity. Um, I think there's different ways essentially we can kind of tweak our teams, and obviously there's still humans involved, right? So especially when I look at things like how COVID is affecting different sports, I think it's probably making the assumptions a little bit harder to predict what's going to be relevant from year to year. So,
Oh yeah, this year in the fantasy football, I just missed out on the championship. Just missed out on the championship because
oh
one
man,
of my great players had was down with COVID right there in the semifinals, and I ended up losing the semifinals. And so I was like that close, but yeah, that is another variable. So obviously, with the stats you can get from these different sites, like you said, people aren't robots, so there's still the human element that needs to be factored in, and so this just gives us more information, but obviously, there's still the fun in the game is the unknown.
yeah, yeah. So when we're kind of talking about this, right? Is there anything like if you were to go and start um, sharing some of this out, right, that you would change or adjust in order to make the consumption of this data easier?
Yeah, I think if I thought about this in terms of something I was going to share with a larger audience, one of the things that I would look to do is in at least in an Alteryx environment is to add the ability for users to pick from list, right? And
Mm.
maybe they want to affect the universe of players, right? If they only want to see American League players instead of the all players, we could set it up here with an analytic app or that type of thing where we can allow the users to do some filtering beforehand, and then they can do whatever analysis they want based on the smaller set. Another thing would be is that's important is scoring systems, because
Yes.
again, I'm in a half dozen different leagues, and everybody has a different scoring system. So you don't want to be limited to what the site you use or the data that somebody else did. If you can set it up so that you can customize and create on the fly your own calculations for scoring, that's going to be
Mhm.
a lot more useful. So I don't really
Yeah.
have anything like that so much because I've always built these things just for my own consumption. It's my own secret weapon here. I don't want to give away too much.
No giving away the secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to share the data because they're still not going to have the same formula as you, right? Yeah. And then in regards to like how, let's say for instance, how some of these um, sources that you shared, like Fantasy Pros, right? Is there something that you think would be cool if they were to provide you this data or even conduct some of the transformations for you? What are some things that you think would be valuable that they could provide really to make a difference on your consumption?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I just mentioned there would be something is if they pretty much on sites like Fantasy Pros will use standard scoring
Hmm.
or things of that nature, but to really get in there and be able to create your own customized scoring systems is something that I think would be and be able to then to rank your players based on the scoring system that you have. That would
Hmm.
be nice. Another thing for my again super geek side of this is I'd love it if I was able to list out uh, contracts for players so that again somebody who's on a 3-year contract, you don't want to accidentally trade somebody like that for somebody on a 1-year contract unless you're taking that into account in their relative worth. So some
Yeah.
things like that I think would be interesting. One thing though I have seen fantasy pros do in the football realm is though I play one of my leagues is on a totally different site that's not fantasy pros.
Hmm.
They've integrated their analysis into that other site, the My Fantasy League site. And so when I go to a page and it has a name of a player, it'll give me a little icon on my browser and it'll let me click on the analysis for Fantasy Pros for that. Or
Nice.
it'll if I'm on my waiver wire sheet, it will say that these are the top waiver wire picks, at this point. So it's
Yeah.
pretty nice. They're getting real smart about a lot of that stuff.
I wish I were more into sports sometimes because I think that would definitely play in. Right now, this will sound really weird, but I'm working on doing some edible landscaping, and there's this philosophy or approach called companion planting, which I think almost ties in here as well, right, with sports players. And it's this idea of if you actually plant these two plants next to each other, they'll actually help each other improve. So when we talk about compatibility and stats and stuff, it's almost interesting to kind of see how some of that can relate, right? So like if I had maybe one of the top shortstops, right? How good of a first baseman do I really need? Or if I
Hmm.
have the best of those, right? Am I going to end up um, getting more people out without even them making it to any of the other bases unless they get a double or a triple, right? I think that would be kind of interesting to see is like, okay, we have lots of individual stats. Now, when we talk about some of those joint stats, how are we essentially clustering those players together to determine what their composite score may be? Um,
No, that's a good point because I know that there's sort of a maxim that says, if you've got a ground ball pitcher, right,
mhm.
you want to make sure your infield defense is really tight. So you're
Yeah,
you're willing to give up some hitting to get a better defense, especially when you have that ground ball pitcher. But to be able to quantify that and be able to say how much of a an advantage that is, that's something where it's a next level type of
yeah.
types of analysis. I'm sure somebody's working on it somewhere because every season I see these brand new stats.
Yeah, and I think when we kind of talk about that, right, that's really taking it to the next level for predictive, which kind of gets into some of what um, I actually found in this round. Let me go ahead and move this out of the way real quick. I actually had two that I was looking at specifically. One is this guy right here. So I'll go ahead and post this in the chat. But this was a how to pick your fantasy Premier League. So we've obviously got the start of the um, World Cup coming up here soon, right? And as we kind of look at this, I wanted to understand, oh, okay, so what is it that we're going to be looking at here, and should we be focused more on players, on the teams, right? And then how do you kind of pool that stuff together? And literally, you also have an optimizer here, right? And then another one that I did, because in talking about these models, right, everybody has a different approach. Here was another one from Matillion, where literally they're getting together some of the World Cup data, and then they have been doing this. Matillion has, I don't know if it's the same person doing it every year, but literally they've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now. So it's kind of interesting to see like how you were talking about stacking that up across contracts, et cetera, right? What is it that is at play here? And when we look at this, you can see again how simple the workflow is, right? And then they're doing the other approach, like we were talking about with the API query, gathering some of the information. Hey, are they actually a World Cup team? Doing a team analysis, right? And then what's the likelihood that they'll win, and just putting that in a graph, right? So very simple components here, having the aggregation, and then trying to figure out whether they're native or non-native players, right? And then setting that up in a stack graph perspective, and just looking again at the different stats that they have is really interesting. So this one wasn't a workflow, sadly, that they shared, but it was pretty sweet to just kind of see them walking through some of this information. And then
Yeah,
here,
that is nice.
yeah, um, here, so let's go through these questions real quick, just with this, right? So I think what did I like? I like the comprehensiveness in terms of breakdown of where they got the data, how to tackle the REST APIs, how easy it is to use REST APIs within Matillion. Um, and then some of the things that I found a little difficult from a traction perspective is I do wish they just shared the workflow itself, right? And then I do like the fact also that within Matillion, they do have some quick site analytics, right, where you can see some of the visualization. This almost reminds me of insights within Alteryx or even the reporting tools, right? And then from a what's not clear perspective, um, again, just kind of, hey, if I were to do this, right, are there other ways to kind of pull the data in? And literally you can see we loaded this data into Amazon Redshift, right, using the Excel query component. And that's where I look at that and say, hey, why wouldn't I just do the query from Excel and get it there easier? That may have actually been easier than using the REST API. And then when we kind of talk about sharing these insights, right, there's a variety of stats here, and like percentages and stuff. These are good to kind of see across the different regions and with the different teams. But what I would want to know is, just because we're doing this comparison, the question is it even really relevant, right? Does being a native player actually help, or is it actually good to have a diverse set of players, um, almost like from baseball, right? Maybe we have some from Puerto Rico, a couple from Cuba. I know that here in Florida, especially South Florida, has a lot of good baseball players, right? Are they from the Midwest? Do they have different styles? Kind of thing would be interesting to see if that actually creates better players. So
Yeah, I've heard on that front. A lot of times the Cuban players will like to play down in Miami,
yeah,
because it's a city that caters more to what they're used to, the weather and everything else like that. So,
yeah,
I think again, going back to what we were saying earlier, people are human beings. Players are human beings, so they sometimes non-sports related things can get to them as well. So,
yeah. And
so
I think some of that's actually interesting because during my research with this, right, there were a couple of transformation workflows that were actually tying in US Census data, right, to understand what that makeup is. And then also I was thinking, hey, what about the weather data, right? So if they grew up in Cuba, right, and that's where they started playing baseball, they may actually prefer to play in warmer weather, right? So is that
Mhm.
a factor? Or is that something, even when you're doing an away game, right? Is that going to be a factor in terms of uh, the outcome? And that's something interesting because I think of like Olympic sports, right? And in the Olympics, that's huge because what do they end up doing? They end up literally maybe flying to another country to do training, even at different altitudes or just different weather and climate, because your performance may be completely different given the geography. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, so what I have here is a couple apps, right? This one was interesting in terms of picking out the different positions, right? And then essentially assigning a budget for the fantasy league. Um, and what was interesting here is if we go into this macro and totality, it is actually showing it's missing a piece here, but they're actually using the optimization tool within
Ah.
Alteryx. So this is pretty sweet because then it shows, just so everyone's aware of kind of what this optimization tool does as a whole, is this uses linear programming. So it's doing some ML here, and then it's using multi-threading in order to identify what that optimal mix is, by looping over the information to essentially figure out what's going to be, in this case, either the best player, right, in terms of the player comparison, and maybe across all the different stats overall. So pretty cool to see. And then if ever you're using like Alteryx, right, this is, I like to call this the Mario's little black box of death, right? Um, Literally, you can see here it's not showing us anything, so it should, if there's any tool configuration, it would have this listed here. So all we really got was that little alert basically saying, hey, this tool doesn't exist um, in the workflow. So like if I hit run here, it's literally just going to error out, and you can see it says, hey, I can't find the FPL fixtures. And then that's something that I do like, that it does let you know maybe what that specific tool is that are missing, etc. But it is a little tricky unless you've seen the workflow before, in which case, in this case, I had not. I don't know what that tool was doing, and there's kind of a lack of clarity there, right? So that's something that I would do as a minor adjustment, is just package the workflow properly here to make it work a little bit easier. So that was the player selection, right? And then here's a fantasy football optimizer. So you've got the call here to Premier Leagues, right? And you can see it's just a quick bootstrap call. It's using this tool called the downloads tool, which can be configured in different ways. Essentially, it could be a basic call, right, where we're calling the URL, kind of like what you saw with the Excel setup, and then you can choose the header, payload, etc. here. And then literally from here, we can go in this case, it's going to give us back some JSON data, right? We'll go ahead and parse that. And now literally we can start seeing the stats rolling in with 50,000, just under 50,000 lines, right? You've got a parse to get the relevant information and kind of pivot that and join it all back together here. I always get a little anxious when I'm doing JSON, right? Because sometimes you'll see some of these things fall out, especially with the objects. If you're not as familiar with it, it may take you a few minutes to kind of put all this together, kind of like what you're seeing down here, right? So there's 13 of these records relating to cards, right? Penalties, um, influence, creativity. I don't know how that's a stat in uh, soccer. So if anybody has any thing that they would like to share in regards to that, we'd love to kind of share that out.
Hey, Andrew, I need to lay out my bias here. This should be called a soccer. optimizer, not a
Yeah,
football optimizer.
fantasy football, right?
That's right.
I think what is it? Probably three-quarters of the world may disagree with you, disagree with you there. So yeah, and I laugh at that all the time because depending on who you're talking to, right? If you start talking football, especially to all our Brazilian viewers out there, obviously this makes sense. You probably got confused because you thought we were talking about American football here, and it's actually soccer. Sorry, it is football. It is football.
Yeah.
Football first, right? So I think it's kind of interesting when we talk about this. I mean, Robert, you're right. Maybe there's a little more creativity in American football because they've got the end zone dances, right?
That's
We
right.
got to we got to give them some extra points for that. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to kind of see. I mean, how people break this out. So I like this workflow because it definitely goes into a handful of different ways to do the transformations, right? And literally here you can again see the optimization tool. And then here's essentially where it's rendering that out, right? So if we wanted to play with this, you can see it's interactive. And literally we can see, okay, what's the objective value? How would we rate these players? And then what are some of the constraints that we have kind of listed here? And we can even choose to kind of adjust this on the fly. And then this literally has to do with all those different constraints, right? So if we wanted to do it relative to each individual um, team, right, or club, then we could do that here, which is pretty impressive from a platform perspective. Um, I think it's a little tricky when you're looking at this, just getting started. Um, I would want more than just what you see with this tour to really give me a good understanding of how I should be editing this, right? So just from a platform perspective, maybe some notes here would be helpful, just in terms of the adjustment, right? Because if I were just using this as an app, this is literally all that was given. And then again, here's literally the clubs, right? That we were talking about.
But one thing that I do like about this, and it's is that with that optimizer tool, I think it's a lot like using the predictive tools. You're getting
Mm.
something different than just repackaging the stats, right? You're
Yeah.
by using that optimizer, it's actually going to make a decision for you, or it's going to do a prediction for you
Mhm.
that isn't something that's just straight reading of the data.
Yeah. So, Robert, would you trust your fantasy selection to an algorithm for an entire season? Or,
No, see, I think I would not, even if it came out to be saying that it was better, or they showed stats that showed it was doing really well. I would still want to go in there and find my favorite player and put him in there someplace.
yeah. Yeah, so you're still willing to bet against the house, huh?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I spend money on these fantasy sites, and then half the time I make my own decision anyways when it comes down to it. So
Well, it's a more informed decision, right? Like
yeah,
you feel
yeah.
empowered. Yeah, I do like um us kind of going through some of this because literally that's what is going to make a difference here, um, in terms of either trusting it, right? Or, I mean, even under stacking up what the competition is. So I think even just learning from this optimization, right? What are some of the key stats that you should be looking at that actually do weigh into the decision, like we were talking about, right? So is it the mixture of players? Is it individual stats that really play in, to kind of build out what that dream team looks like, right? And then you end up with a beautiful roster here like this one of 15 players. And see, that's the deal, is I don't see anything here about COVID or any of those stats, right? And then these creativity stats seem a little crazy. Like I see this 931, I'm still trying to figure out how that plays in. uh, at least I can respect some on the form and others, right? anticipate some of that. Awesome. Um, yeah, and then when we look at this, right, from a reporting perspective, you can see these reports going out. And if we wanted to look at this PXML, right, I could open up this report um, and decide to update my Sublime text editor instead of clicking next there, which is always helpful whenever we're giving a demo, right? And then it looks like we've got some coefficient tables and stuff here. So I think when we examine some of those pieces, I think that's the part that really gets me excited is, again, how are we essentially playing into all the different aspects here from a building perspective, and then is there a way that we can essentially take sports to the next level? It always just takes me back to the first time that I saw, oh man, I'm going to forget the movie now. What is that? The
I've
Sixth Day.
I've
The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they had the football players with the helmets on.
no, yeah.
And that really dates me, I think, for sure, because that was like one of the first movies I remember getting on DVD. But literally that, I was like, oh man, that's so cool that they could integrate. I wasn't thinking data at the time, but just insights into the helmet. And now I look at that, and a lot of that kind of stuff is readily available for us to kind of explore. So yeah. What are some things that you look forward to in the space, Robert, in regards to other sports getting uh, more analytics and doing transformation with them?
Yeah, how baseball went through that Moneyball phase where everything used to be where just some old scouts would sit around and say this guy's going to be good or that guy's not going to be any good, and then they gave up those things for more driven stats. But I think there's still a long ways to go there too, because like one of the things that doesn't that a lot of people will agree is not well understood right now is just the like really how to rate a defensive player and how
Mm,
to rate how valuable is their defense to the overall winning and losing of a game, that kind of
hmm
thing. So I think that the stats are going to continue to evolve because it's as a player, I mean, as a sports fan, the Tampa Bay Rays a couple years ago were in the World Series, and they had Blake Snell, their pitcher was really pitching well,
hmm
and then based on analytics or what the stats over a long period of time said, Kevin Cash, the manager, came in and took him out, and as soon as they took him out, the Dodgers were able to score 2 runs off of his replacement when they had been able to do nothing against him. So sometimes it seems like the stats can get overwhelming for people, and so I think there's still deeper levels of stats. Sort of get more of that human element back into the game because not every day that somebody goes out there to pitch are they pitching exactly as well as they did the
Yeah.
day before and all that. But I think I think that the to me the big thing that's gonna happen more is, like I said, those defensive stats, and then also it's gonna be um, like in baseball. I hope and I believe that they're going to actually uh, pull through with electronic strike calling and that kind of thing. So if you've got instead of having the umpires call the balls and strikes, have an electronic strike zone that will do that for you.
Mm.
Is I think that there's with this technology we have right now, it's very archaic to let
Still have a person.
some guy stand there and they say, "Well, we know he was 6 inches outside, but that's just the way he likes to call it." I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I hope to see, and hopefully, as this stuff permeates down to lower levels too, I'm hoping that the like at the high school level, pitchers don't get overworked,
Mm.
because if
Yeah.
they've got better stats that show, how many pitches somebody can make before they start to wear down and stuff like that, you can keep some of these people's careers going longer than some Neanderthal in the background trying to tell them, no, you can pitch 18 innings this game and just keep going, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, or even back-to-back games, right?
Yeah.
Watching them with their ice packs on their arm and doing some of that. Yeah, I think it's interesting. In my mind, I almost see in the future, right, what uh, SpaceX is doing with some of the suits, right? If you look at how they've kind of trimmed down the spacesuits, and I know some of it is obviously because they're in the capsules. But I look at those suits and the sensors and things that they have built into them, right? I see those sensors being part of what we're doing in the future. And if I had to guess, right, I don't think they're going to start with like football players because those sensors are going to get beat to heck. It'll probably start with like maybe the NASCAR drivers or Formula One, and they'll just try and make them lightweight and sit in there so they can measure like reaction time and all that kind of things, right? And then I anticipate in the future, like you were talking about for defensive linemen, right? It may literally just be their reaction time that they're gauging. Hey, when they say hike, right? Or how quickly are you able to spring into action? Because maybe that's one of the factors that comes in, and they've got to measure some of that reaction time from a muscle perspective. I think obviously that's getting into like a whole nother realm of things, which will almost be like sports medicine, right? That you're getting involved with in terms of understanding what those reaction times and stuff are. And then, as you kind of mentioned, that it permeating down to the lower levels, right? With sensors in the bats. I think it'll almost be like it was maybe for us as kids. You want to be in band. Do you know how much that trumpet or whatever costs, right? You'll hear parents complaining about, oh man, that baseball bat's like $500 now or $1,000. Like we need to talk about whether you're going to take this sport seriously versus what it
Oh
was
yeah.
before.
I know that they've done a lot of work, and it seems to be doing pretty well with like in football in United States football, in the NFL especially. They've gone and made the helmet technology a lot better, because with
Yeah.
that same data that they're able to capture, they're able to see what happens when some defensive guy goes and goes straight forward with the top of his helmet right at you, and
Hmm.
and that kind of thing, and how the brain recovers from those kind of injuries. So it's always, as a sports guy, I always like to keep the stars out on the field when possible. So
Hmm.
if you can do things to get longer careers for some of the star players, it's going to be a win-win, all around.
That would actually be interesting because, like, if you got hit a couple times, maybe like in the leg area, right? They may run the stats and be like, "Ooh, man, you can maybe take one more, and you may end up with a torn ACL," right? So, would you like to sit out the next couple quarters, or even just the next couple plays, right? Or is this something that you're willing to risk, right? And that's something that the coaches and the players have to kind of decide. But I think even just that information would be valuable. And again, that kind of comes from the suits, right? Initially, I was just talking about what's your individual relationship with that suit versus, again, impacting. Hey, I notice that I don't get that tackle whenever somebody comes in, maybe and gets me on the middle of the chest. Maybe I need to be looking at a different method. If they come in lower, I'm pretty good at um, repositioning myself to get at a possible tackle of the quarterback. So
Mhm.
yeah, there could be a couple different ways of doing that. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and I don't see any more questions streaming in, so let's go ahead and wrap up here. And as always, I want to share with everyone, feel free to sign up if you do want to be part of the session that we have going every week. There's the sign up form for Sign Up Genius. I'll flash that here on the screen. If you would like to sign up, you can see that here in the chat. And next week, our topic is pizza, which is pretty cool. So obviously, if you're game for some sports, right? Hopefully, you're excited about some pizza. We've got to choose which house we're going to be part of. Robert, what's your pizza place of choice here?
Oh man, I like. There's a place called West Shore Pizza, which is New York style
Ooh,
pizza. The long, the really big, thin pizza that you can roll up and stuff. So I enjoy
nice.
that.
Is that local there in Tampa, or is it up by
Uh,
West Point?
no, it's a, no, it's more of a, it's a chain. It's a chain around here, but
Nice,
I've seen them in different places. So
sweet.
no, it's I like that style pizza, even though I am from Southern California, not New York, but I like that.
I like the extremes. So we've got Lazy Moon over here, which is actually from a UCF alumni. They have, I'm not even kidding, I think it's either 36 or 42-inch pizzas. Um, it's insane. Like the guy is folding it, and literally, I'm like, there's probably like 50 arm hairs in this thing because he's over using both of his hands to spread it out. And then I obviously like Chicago deep dish is pretty sweet, but those are it depends on the mood, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So if you guys want to sign up, right, we've got plenty of topics coming up, and then as always, it's real easy. Just find some transformation workflows and answer those three questions: what you like about it, what you would change, and then what are some things that could make it easier to share. And thank you, Robert, for joining us this week to talk about sports. I always love hearing about baseball from you and the different things that you're working on. And any thoughts on who's going to take the cup this year?
Oh, the World Cup? No, no.
Yeah.
Probably no. I won't even. Brazil.
And
Brazil will win. That's it.
Brazil.
That's it.
That's the right answer. And then what about for baseball? Who's going to be winning the World Series? You got any?
Oh well, the Dodgers, of course, are going to win the World Series
Okay,
this
yeah,
year. They,
that was easy, right? I
yeah,
expected to
probably.
see you come in with full swag and like banners going and everything else.
Yep, yep. I was going to. Then I thought, well, be you know, maybe a little too much, so I
Too
backed
much,
off.
too much trash talking, right? Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Happy Tuesday. Look forward to seeing you next week, and we look forward to seeing you volunteer as well. So please feel free to share with your friends and coworkers. And as always, thank you to our sponsor here with Data Meeting for taking care of us and allowing us to do this every day. And then if you're looking either for training or work related to data transformation tools, you can see we have a broad variety of expertise and we're more than happy to help. So feel free to either message Robert or myself and we can get you taken care of. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.